I'm Not Naughty I'm Autistic, Jodi's Journey. Jodi Shaw here, and today I want to tell you a bit about the first book I ever wrote. This is unquestionably still my proudest literary achievement, but I never planned to write it. In fact, the book only came about because of constant pressure from my friends and family. You see, back when my son was diagnosed with autism, the condition was quite rare. Statistically, it affected about one person in every 2,500, mostly boys. Today, it's still found more in boys than girls, but the figures have increased to about one person in every 100. That's a huge rise, isn't it? Anyway, back in 1990, when Jodi first began to develop autistic symptoms, hardly anyone knew of the disability, including me. Actually, I'd never even heard of autism, and my first introduction to it was watching the film Rain Man starring Tom Cruise and Dustin Hoffman. It was a very difficult time when Jodi was young, especially as everyone just assumed he was a miserable and naughty little boy who needed a good smack. Actually, when I was out with him one day, an elderly woman even offered me her walking stick to do it. It was a living nightmare, and I must admit I felt pretty helpless as he turned from a happy, lively, sociable, loving baby into the toddler from hell. Anyway, as I said, autism was very rare at that time. Consequently, there were very few books on the subject or any real support of any kind. Parents of autistic children really struggled to cope, understand, or explain their child. One of the biggest problems was, and still is, that every autistic individual is different, even though their underlying problems are the same. As a result, there was no specific cure, and there still isn't really. However, there are many interventions that can help considerably, especially if you start them early enough. These days, of course, autism is so common, diagnosis can and is made earlier, so there really is no excuse not to do anything you can to help your child. Back then, though, it was a different story, and Jodi had huge problems with communication. When I said it was a living nightmare, I wasn't joking. He didn't make eye contact, look at what he wanted, didn't point, didn't speak, didn't understand yes or no, didn't play with anything, had no sense of danger, wasn't in the slightest bit embarrassed about anything, couldn't wait for anything, and the only way he could communicate he wanted something was to either take it, throw himself on the floor in a tantrum, or hit me. For several years I was his personal punch bag, but I just took it, never hit him back or shouted at him because I knew he was doing the best he could. Somehow I understood if he had any other way to tell me what he actually wanted or needed, he'd have used it. However, he didn't, and when he was small, Jodi looked perfectly okay. He was an attractive child, and no one would ever have guessed he had a problem, but he was completely different from any of his peers in terms of behaviour. As I said, it was a living nightmare, and the reason I wrote on his T-shirt in special fabric pens, "I'm not naughty, I'm autistic," it served as an explanation to others, and he wore it often. Over time, people came to be aware Jodi had a problem, and would often ask how he was, particularly my Aunt Sheila. She had cancer at the time and said I was so enthusiastic when I spoke about the simple things Jodi had done, I ought to write a book. I don't know what made her think I could even write, but she persisted. Sheila said it could help others in the same situation, and also people understand how this invisible disability affects families. Things which parents of non-autistic children most likely don't even notice are such huge achievements for people with autism, and back then I would talk about everything Jodi did with great enthusiasm to anyone who would listen. Eventually, after much persuasion, my Aunt Sheila and others wore me down, and I wrote the book over a period of 10 days. Well, actually it was 10 nights, and it was written on an A4 notepad whilst I was propped up in bed watching the TV, so you can tell it wasn't getting my full attention. The words flowed, though, and the following morning I would type up my notes, and when it was finally finished, I gave the story to my aunt, who promptly read it, told me it was brilliant, and asked what I was going to do with it. Actually, as I'd never intended to write it, I wasn't planning on doing anything. I'd written it more to stop people pestering me, so I said nothing. Once more she got on my case, and I sent the story off to the National Autistic Society, who told me they loved it. At that time, though, all their funding was tied up in research and not available for publications of personal stories. However, they directed me to Jessica Kingsley Publications and advised me to send off the manuscripts to them with a covering letter. They also said it was unlikely I'd hear anything for about 3 months, and not to keep contacting the company as publishers don't like that. They get thousands of manuscripts, you see, and you just have to wait patiently until yours is read, if ever. 1 week later, I got a phone call. It was Jessica Kingsley calling me personally. She told me she'd read the manuscript on the plane coming back from USA and asked if I'd allow her company to publish the story in their next catalogue. I agreed. Jodi's story was published, and the rest, as they say, is history. I'm really glad it worked out that way, though, because my aunt was able to see the book in print before she sadly died. I'm Not Naughty I'm Autistic is Jodi's true story. It's been written as if he's narrating the whole thing, which of course is ridiculous as he doesn't really speak, but it makes the story very easy to read. I've been told it's fascinating, funny, and insightful. People who've read it have told me it made them laugh and cry. Most said they couldn't put it down, and that's probably partly because there aren't any chapters in the book. One woman read it in bed one night and got up at 5 a.m. the next morning to read it again. She said she loved it, which clearly pleased me very much, but the thing I'm most pleased about is the book has helped people understand what it's like to live with autism. Also, it's made people think twice about making snap judgments about the behaviour of others, especially children. Whilst there are undoubtedly many naughty children out there, my son Jodi was never intentionally one of them. He certainly didn't deserve a walking stick. I'm Not Naughty I'm Autistic, Jodi's Journey is available on Amazon in both paperback and Kindle versions, and you can find out more on my book page at jeanshaw.com. I'd love to know what you think of the book, so if you ever read it and have the time, please leave me a review on Amazon. Thank you so much. Take care.